Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom. And today, Sam, we had a chance to talk for the first time with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the new Vikings general manager. And it was a very interesting autobiographical press conference, maybe the most background that we have ever had on any general manager or anyone in charge that we have ever spoken with as the new general manager comes into play here. And I think that where people's intrigue really lies with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is just his analytics background coming from the Wall Street to the NFL and working his way up in the San Francisco 49ers organization and then moving over to a higher position with the Cleveland Browns and ultimately being one of the first people, if not the first person with his background to be a general manager. What did you make of the way that he addressed some of the questions about his background in numbers?
Yeah, I get the sense that he's trying to distance himself somewhat from that. I don't know if you call it a stigma or that characterization, but clearly he wants to be seen as a general manager with broader skills than just the numbers. He made it very clear that he's been removed from the stock market for a long time. He made it clear that analytics are just one piece of any evaluation, that he had many other duties in Cleveland, including kind of going on getting a scouting boot camp from Andrew Berry and having conversations with players. So I think he wants to be removed from that. I think that's good. I mean, I think you want to have a GM that has range, that has interpersonal skills, that has scouting skills. And it was really good to talk to Andrew Berry, actually, because the Browns set that up. They allowed us to pick his brain. And he talked about all of their front office execs really being cross-trained. And I think that that's probably a good way to go about it in any organization, that you don't want to have analytics on one side of the room, personnel on the other side of the room, and needing to go across the aisle and try to like make peace with the other side. Seemed like it might have been a little bit like that with the previous regime, where the analytics people were shouting out these numbers and then the coach didn't want to hear it. And I think there's probably going to be a little more crossover with this next regime. But I also get the sense that and probably more so after hearing from him and others, that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah probably has a wider skill set than maybe we would have assumed when the hire was made. Just not knowing a lot about the guy, I think we learned a lot about him. Unfortunately, I think because his story is so unique, we learned so much about that we didn't leave a lot of time to ask about the roster and all the decisions that need to be made. But certainly there will be time to address those in the coming months.
Right, that's correct. And I saw a few people on Twitter saying, why didn't you guys ask about Kirk Cousins? I mean, one is that, like you said, his background is so interesting, and he had a lot of things to say about his rise in the NFL, his quick rise. He's 40 years old. There's apparently some issue with Google saying the wrong age for him, so that clears it up. He is 40 years old. He told us that after the press conference. But only being 40 and only being in the NFL since 2013, it was more interesting to hear about that than whatever platitudes he was going to give us about Kirk Cousins. And also the coaching search, when he was asked about that, didn't yield much of an answer either. But it sounds like what they're going to do in the coaching search, Sam, is that once Adofo-Mensah gets all set, and he said he's going to talk with the players and the leadership council, then they'll talk with more potential candidates and make a decision. I wouldn't be surprised if they figure something out at the head coaching spot by next week, because I'm sure that Adofo-Mensah has thought about this just a little bit and then has to get on the same page with the Wilfs. But I think that something that's really, really important is melding the general manager and the head coach. So we kind of have a good sense for what Adofo-Mensah's vision for this is going to be, that it's combining the scouting and the analytics to make the right decisions and have the collaborative effort, which is talked about a ton, of getting everybody's opinions and making sure everyone feels like they're involved. But ultimately, what your goal is to get the best players for the coach and the players of the type that the coach needs for his scheme. So what do you think that this means now that he is in place for the head coaching search?
Well, he didn't tell us outright that he has 53-man roster authority like Rick Spielman, but my interpretation of his comments is that his contract indicates that he does have that power, but he's still going to seek input. So even though he has the authority, I think he's still going to be collaborative. And I think that makes sense. I mean, I think that when you're a first-time GM, potentially hiring a first-time coach, you're going to work together and figure out what exactly you want. And hopefully you have, that mutual respect where one person isn't bulldozing the other. And I think that he is going to seek a lot of input. Now, is he going to be willing to make some people upset with some tough decisions? That's a bigger question, right? Because he's got to bring in a coach and let that coach know that, hey, this roster might be a little tapped out. We might have to make some difficult decisions. Are you willing to be patient? Are you willing to start over with maybe a younger QB and less talent in this first year or two? That's a relevant consideration when you're looking into these coaches. I am curious whether he brings in any other interviewees, because from the looks of it, they're down to one offensive coordinator or offensive minded candidate that's been previously interviewed. And four defensive minded guys. And as most people know who watch these shows or listen to our podcast, I'm on team offense. I want to find an offensive minded guy. Hackett's going to Denver. Looks like Kellen Moore is either staying in Dallas or going to Miami. So there's just not a lot of options left on that side of the ball. And we'll see if he has strong opinions on bringing in extra interviewees or if he picks from the pool they have.
Well, it is very interesting to think about his influences in his past. And he talked a lot about Bill Walsh and how much he appreciated him, and put up a picture of Bill Walsh in his office. And then it's Kyle Shanahan. Before that, it's Jim Harbaugh in San Francisco. And then when he's working with Cleveland, it's Kevin Stefanski. So his background has been working with offensive-minded head coaches. At the same time, some of their more impressive candidates, like DeMeco Ryans, are on the defensive side. And that really leaves it up to anybody's guess which direction they'll go within the next week. Now, when it comes to us talking about the collaborative effort and getting everybody involved, here's my question, Sam, is they don't appear to be making huge changes in the front office, meaning he comes in and then they fire everybody and replace everybody with his friends. I guess I wonder what you think that means, that he's going to have to take command of a front office that's been working under Rick Spielman for a very long time, and how you think he'll approach that based on what he said today.
Yeah, I look at it from the perspective of the people that are staying. When you get a new boss, you're probably a little bit on edge. You might feel like you have a target on your back, that you might be replaced if you don't do a good job. Maybe you're, a little resentful because you like the other guy more. And we don't entirely know, what their relationship was like with Rick. We did hear Adofo-Mensah say that he felt like there was the type of process-driven people in the front office and sort of his people that he would get along with well. And that's part of the reason the job had such appeal to him. So I think that's good. But I also think that there's a risk of, if you're the newcomer, a first-time GM, and you're surrounded by people that have kind of had their processes in place, it's harder then to interject a new culture or new processes or more efficient processes into that. And when you don't have your people to sort of back you on it, then you might fall into sort of the groupthink that was already existing. There's so many crazy organizational, social dynamics at play. And unfortunately, we don't get a great look behind the scenes, but just those are the things happening right now as he, goes to work. And I'm guessing he's going to be working a lot of long days in the next few weeks.
And at very least, he comes from functional organizations. Cleveland over the last few years has actually become one after years of being dysfunctional. But still, there's no way to tell how someone will operate when they are the one in charge rather than just being a cog in the machine. So since we did not discuss at the press conference the toughest decisions with the roster facing Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, let's talk about them right now. I mean, so you did a piece on this, counting down the most difficult decisions with players. Let's just do a quick top three. I'll give my number 3, 2, and then we can agree on number 1 already. We know what that is. But I think the Danielle Hunter contract facing him is one of the most difficult. That's where I would put it number 3, because if they keep on Danielle Hunter and add void years, that's kind of what they've been doing before to keep him and start translating money. And otherwise, they'll have to extend him, which means giving him a huge contract after he hasn't played much in the last couple of years, but he is a tremendous player. I think that's one of the most difficult decisions he's going to have to face.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, every other player, well, with the exception of Cousins is probably number one, but
He's number one. Yes, there's no
every
question
other
about it.
player you can tolerate being on the roster next year. Like, some guys are expensive, but you can deal with it. Hunter's got a $26 million cap hit. That is untenable. It cannot stay. It needs to be either an extension or a trade. Like that, those are the only two options. You can't just stand pat with that cap number in Hunter. So figuring out how to either extend and reduce the cap number or get max dollar for a guy that's coming off 2 years of injuries probably isn't a very prudent time to do that either. So I think the Vikings are going to have some tough deliberations. I would obviously say that, Cousins is super hard. We can get into that. I would also add in the defensive tackles. I mean, I think that you might be looking at either Pierce or Tomlinson being a cap casualty, perhaps on cut day in training camp, because after June 1st, the dead cap goes way down. For Tomlinson, for Pierce, it's like $2 million. I don't know if the next coach will want 2 defensive nose tackles. So you could be looking at one of those players being shown the door.
Yeah, I think also Harrison Smith is a really difficult one here because he is still a terrific player, but the way that his contract is set up and his age might not fit with where they want to be. And of course, nobody was saying the word rebuild, and they want to stay away from that word, but it kind of matches up what they have to do with the defensive side of the ball at very least. And then, of course, the most difficult decision facing him is Kirk Cousins. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has a background of a team who has a quarterback that is actually expensive this year in Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco, and one other team that's facing a similar decision in Cleveland of whether to extend Baker Mayfield or move on from Baker Mayfield. Is there any hints that you could take from either his comments, his background, anything that would point you toward where they will go with the quarterback position?
I listened back to a radio interview he did after his press conference. And in that interview, he used a line that was something like, every move you make has to be moving toward the ultimate goal of a Super Bowl. And to me, that means you need to get on a Super Bowl track. And I don't think that means retaining Kirk Cousins. I'm coming at it through maybe a bit of a biased lens because I think that there's, an 80% chance that Kirk Cousins should be traded at really all costs. I think that has to be move number one. And we didn't get a straight answer on how he feels about that. But I think that he understands efficiency. He understands, what a bad contract looks like when you incorporate production and age and all of that. And I tend to think that he understands that if you're not, shooting for the Super Bowl, if you're settling, then you're probably that's not the ultimate goal. So I tend to think that he sees the truth here and how onerous that contract is. How about you? What did you detect?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't get a feel for that, but I do think that when you're coming into a front office with a lot of people who have been here and a lot of people who have seen it not work, and I'm sure that there were those in the front office who supported the move when it happened to sign Kirk Cousins to the huge contract that he signed to take up a big part of that salary cap. But there has to also be people who were close with Rick Spielman or who liked Mike Zimmer and see those guys without jobs, in part because the quarterback didn't play well enough. That's not to blame Kirk Cousins for everything, but it is to say that with his contract and his talent level, those two things have not added up very often in the NFL to teams reaching the Super Bowl and to teams winning the Super Bowl. So if you take that comment, you can make something out of it. But I also think that it's long been the efficient thinkers' idea that if you don't have someone great, then you have to have someone cheap. And the Vikings have neither one of those things right now at the quarterback position. And plus, I think he's got to have a sense, especially from having just been in another front office, what the price would be. And to be able to talk to people around the league and know what might somebody give up for Kirk Cousins. But I think the interesting thing about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is that we are going to find out very quickly just how he views this team, how he believes, how close he believes they are, what kind of scheme he wants to run. All those things will be determined pretty quick, because if they're going to move Kirk Cousins, they can't really wait around forever, because they'll have to start preparing to draft a quarterback potentially, or sign one, or trade for one. So it will be very interesting, and I think refreshing for a lot of Vikings fans to have conversations about hitting this reset button with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, who I think we would both walk away from today saying very impressive. Everyone always wins the press conference, but he comes across very impressively based on the way he speaks, and also the way that he presents himself, his background, his story, all those things, I think are a breath of fresh air for Vikings fans who may have gotten tired of kind of the same old with Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer.
Yeah, he's a fun guy to listen to because he's got sort of that next level thinking, talking about analytical processes, talking about how he makes decisions. He's bringing a whole new mentality to the table. So learning about that mentality, seeing how he puts it into action, that's going to be fascinating. And I think our hope as media members is that he's accessible. His predecessor, Rick Spielman, was not really accessible, did a couple of press conferences every year. Hopefully we get a little more of a voice that can help inform us about the team's decisions, and also someone who can speak about the tough stuff and not leave that to the players and the head coach to have to handle. If he sort of like takes that accountability off of their plate and handles it himself, that I just think lends credibility to the whole organization.
I noticed Spielman is doing more and more interviews now on TV and so forth, which is interesting. Sam, thanks for your time. And we did an entire reaction, longer form, with ESPN's Courtney Cronin on our podcast. Make sure you check that out in the description, or wherever you get your podcast. Just type in Purple Insider. We do it every day. We got all sorts of breakdowns of what it means to have Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as the Vikings general manager. And of course, keep it here, and we'll be back here on Purple Insider.